Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get a basic KVM virtualization setup running and how to create your first virtual machine in that environment. If you're not familiar with KVM, it stands for Kernel-based Virtual Machine. It is the Linux solution for virtualization, just like you have Hyper-V from Microsoft and ESXi from VMware and Zen from Citrix. KVM is what we have in the Linux world. You can go to www.linux-kvm.org and there is all sorts of information if you want to deep dive into KVM. The scope of this video is just a quick way of getting you started so you can poke around with it, work with it in your lab, and have some fun with discovery. There aren't really many prerequisites for this video. You do need to be able to install Linux server, and I have a video that I'll link in the description about how to install Linux server. It's very easy. You can pretty much click through the installer. This video is going to assume that you use the minimal installation for Linux server, and that installation is going to happen on a physical machine because our hypervisors run on a physical box. And the other prerequisite is that you have some kind of client machine running Linux. Either you have Linux on a desktop or a laptop. In this example, I'm actually using another hypervisor running a Linux VM to be able to have a nice fresh install to work with you. So with that being said, I have my Linux installation here. This is Fedora 30 workstation, and I've already I haven't really done much configuration on it other than DNF update to make sure all my packages and such are up to date. So to get started, we're going to go to Activities, and we're going to type in terminal. So we're going to be doing all this from the command line. Now this is the default GNOME interface. You can use whatever you wish, but you need to be able to have access to a terminal. And what I'm going to do, first I'm going to make sure that this VM can connect to our server, or rather traffic can pass to and from. So I'm going to ping 192.168, not 16Y, 168.1.128. I know that's the IP address of my KVM host. Now on this host, all I have is a Fedora minimal installation. I haven't done anything else to it other than go through the installer, which creates user accounts and make sure you have up-to-date packages. One reason why I like using the minimal install is that it has no other packages with it, and that's good for a lab when you want to have some control over exactly what you have on your server for learning purposes and such. So to be able to connect to the server, we're going to use SSH, but we're going to do one other little task, and that is to configure something called key-based authentication, which is not a very difficult thing to do. And matter of fact, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. The reason why you would want to use key-based authentication, one, in a production environment, it's generally more secure than just password authentication. And two, when you're working with Virt Manager, which I'll be showing you in this video, when you connect to your hypervisor using using key-based authentication, that's going to make life so much easier for you. Otherwise, you're going to have lots of pop-ups asking for your password every time you want to do something, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but after a while, especially in your lab environment, that's going to get annoying. So the basis of key-based authentication, what's going to happen is we're going to generate a key on this instance of Linux here, my client. We're going to copy that over to our server, and then the server is going to, pretty much when we make that SSH connection, it's going to compare, make sure keys match, and then let stuff work. So to be able to generate this key, we're going to use a command called ssh-keygen. Now you can use the man pages to see about various options and such, but just running the command will walk you through a little wizard, and I'll show you this now. It's going to create the key pair. It's going to ask enter the file in which to save the key. By default, it's just going to make a file called id_rsa. That's fine to keep the default. We'll press enter. If you want to have a passphrase to be able to use it, you can enter this here. We're not going to use a passphrase for this example, so we'll press enter. It's going to ask enter the same passphrase again, which we're using nothing for that. So press enter. And at this point, it has created our key. So the next step is we need to copy this to the server that's going to be our KVM host. So to do that, we're going to do the command called ssh-copy-id. And then we're going to use the put the account at whatever IP address that we're trying to connect to. And I'm going to connect using the root account at 192.168.1.128. And at this point, it's going to ask, first of all, it says, hey, we're not sure if this is really the thing, or do you want to continue? And I'm going to say yes to this because I know for a fact that 192.168.1.128 is the host that it's saying that it is. So I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to ask for the password. So I'm going to enter that. See if I get that right the first time. And I did. And notice it says you can check by just doing SSH root at that, and if the keys are properly added and configured, then you will simply be SSH'd into the machine. So let's do that. SSH root at 192.168.1.128. And I'm now in the virtual machine. Notice it says root at KVM lab there. During the installation process, I went ahead and did the option of setting the host name, so that way it wouldn't just be like localhost.local domain. Just make this a little bit easier for us. So we're on root at KVM lab. We're now on the KVM server. I'm going to use the clear command, clear the screen, just to make this a little bit more readable. Now, there are several packages that have to be installed for KVM to run. Luckily, since this is a pretty common thing, running hypervisors on what's called the bare metal or the physical server, there are some that argue, and I believe rightfully so, that pretty much the only thing that should be on the bare metal is a hypervisor, but that's a discussion for another time. So rather than having to memorize all of the individual packages, which there really aren't many, I think off the top of my head there are 5 that you really have to have to be able to get KVM up and going. But what we're going to do is install what's called a package group. And to do that, we're going to use the DNF command, which is the command used to install software in Fedora. Yum is what you use in CentOS. I'm not 100% sure if the package name is going to be the same for the Debian line of distros and using apt-get. You'd have to check on that, but the basic concept is the same. So we're going to do DNF group install, and then in quotes, headless virtualization. I can't talk and type at the same time. Now, I'm not using -y or anything because I want to go through all the steps of the installation process. And also I'm going to double click my terminal here to take it to full screen. There we go. I'm going to press enter. And this is going to check our mirrors on the new server. And as you can see, there are 305 packages that have to be installed. Well, the ones that are the most important, I'm going to scroll up in my terminal window here. Really, the ones that are the most important are virt install, QEMU, KVM. You would also do virt, the libvirt packages and such, and then everything that's underneath are all the dependencies. You don't have to memorize all the dependencies. That's the beauty of using package managers in the Linux environment, that it handles all that for you. But just to make life a little bit easier, I like using the group with the headless virtualization. Now, there is a group that's just virtualization. I don't use that for installing this on my host, simply because that's going to install a couple of extra packages to have a GUI to be able to access the virtual machines. Well, on the actual hypervisor, you won't ever use that. You would always be connecting to the hypervisor from a remote machine that has a GUI on it, and you have whatever management software that you use or that you need. So for our server, we're doing the headless virtualization. We're going to click Y, and it'll start going through our packages. This should just take a few seconds or so. It's not going to take very long. There's one prompt that I want to show you. Normally I don't wait for everything to scroll through, but I know it's going to be quick. You'll be prompted about a fingerprint. If this is a new installation of Fedora, this is normal. Say yes, and it will then install all those packages that it downloaded. Again, this will take just a moment. And like I say, I normally don't show all the scrolling through, but for this tutorial, this is a assuming not a large base of knowledge, so I'm showing you what all of the steps are going to be. It won't take too long to get this done. This is relatively lightweight application. And it's done. So you're thinking, great, I've installed my packages, I'm ready to go. Unfortunately, the answer is not quite yet. First, one thing that's going to pose a problem, if I were to do this command systemctl status and the service that KVM is going to be, which is the libvirtd service, you're going to see that it's inactive and dead. Well, we'd have to start the service. There's another piece that allows, if you have multiple NICs on your server, or really even this NIC, and you have the virtual networking and such eventually configured with KVM, there's a setting that needs to be set to true in order to allow network traffic to pass between NICs. Normally that's not allowed. It's a security feature, and there are a couple of ways of setting it and having it be persistent. However, the easy way to do this is, once you've installed the KVM packages, reboot your server, because once that server, and by server I mean this is the physical server that we've just installed the KVM packages on. Once you reboot the physical server, it's going to automatically start the libvirtd service, and it is also going to set that parameter that was telling me about to allow traffic to flow between NICs. So I'm going to issue the reboot command. Now for this, since I am remotely connected, we're not going to be able to watch the reboot, because remember, this is I'm doing this on a physical server, and it's also going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to do the reboot. And so once the reboot is done, we'll come back and continue the video. And we're back, and you can see where my pings have started to answer once again after the reboot. So I'm going to press Control-C to end the pings. Alright, so we had 83% packet loss. That's terrible, but that's because I was having that ping run pretty much during the whole reboot. So let's clear our screen, and let's SSH again to our server as root. And what we're going to find, if I were to do that systemctl rather, status libvirtd, it is now active and running, and we don't see a whole load of errors there in the little snippet from the log. And if you're curious, the item about allowing network traffic to travel between NICs, if you were to use the cat command, which shows you the contents of a file, we're going to go to proc sys, let's see if I have this memorized, net IPv4, see if, yep, tab completion works, so this is correct. And so this particular setting is now 1. If we would have done this prior to rebooting, it would be at 0. So as far as what you need to be able to run KVM, that's it. Your host is now a KVM hypervisor, and we can make some VMs on it. So I'm going to minimize or bring that back to its normal size, and we're also going to do exit because we're going to break this SSH connection, and so now we're back on our actual machine. So as I said, on the client machine, you're going to need some type of application to connect to your hypervisor to be able to manage your VMs and create them. Now, if you're a master at KVM, you're going, hey, I can SSH to the machine and use the virsh commands to make my VMs. That's true, but that's outside the scope of what we're doing here. So the two programs that you're going to need are called Virt Manager and Virt Viewer. Virt Manager is the console that allows you to connect to your hypervisor and toggle settings and create the VMs, and then Virt Viewer is what allows you to be able to have a console view of the VM. So to install those, so we're back on our regular system, we're going to use sudo, because unless you're logged in as root, which I don't recommend you do, we'll use sudo to have root privileges temporarily. We're going to do dnf install Virt Manager and also Virt Viewer. So we're going to install two things at the same time. We're going to put in our sudo password. And it's going to check our mirrors. This won't take too long to install either. Famous last words in IT, should, right? And it's going to pull down a couple dependencies, so not too large of packages. In just a moment, this will finish, and then we'll be able to continue with getting our VMs going. While this is finishing up, I'm going to go to the Fedora site, and we're going to download an ISO. When you're dealing with virtualization, and in an example like this where our host is remote. Now granted, the host is about 5 feet away from me here in my home lab, but if you're in a production environment, your host is probably in a data center somewhere that may or may not be local to you. And so there is no take the CD there and put it into your host to have whatever operating system you want to install. So we're going to be using ISO files. So I'm going to go to Fedora's site, getfedora.org. And we're going to download the server ISO. I'm going to use the net install, and because it's nice and small, we're going to save the file, and by default Firefox is going to download it to our downloads folder. So we're going to let that work for a moment. And it's finished installing Virt Manager. So to run Virt Manager, you can do it one of two ways. We can either go to activities and search, start typing the word virtual, and if I spell it right, and Virtual Machine Manager will appear. Another way of doing it is from the command prompt, type Virt Manager, and that will run your Virtual Machine Manager. Now, when you run it the first time, it's going to ask for authentication. We're going to click cancel here. And the reason being, the default installation is assuming that you're running KVM on your local machine, which in this case we're not. We're actually running KVM on a remote machine. So we're going to click cancel that. I'm actually going to right click this here and delete it because we're not running, and yes, I'm sure I want to delete it. You can always add it back later if you want, because we're not running KVM on our local machine. So for Virtual Machine Manager, we're going to go to File, then Add Connection. The type of hypervisor is QEMU KVM. We're going to connect over SSH, and the host name is going to be the IP address of our KVM server. Or if you altered the host file on your machine so you can resolve it via names, you can put that there too. But we're going to use the IP address for this example. 28. We're going to click Auto Connect. Otherwise, every time you start Virtual Machine Manager, you'll have to manually connect to your hypervisor. And in this case, in my lab here, I have the one hypervisor, so I'm always going to be connecting to it. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, we created the key-based authentication for SSH. And so at this point, once you click Connect, famous last words, should in IT, right? We'll click Connect, and we're connected. If this did not work, you would receive errors. If you did not have the key-based authentication, you would have had to enter your password a couple of times as the connection pieces were made. So at this point, we now have the connection to our hypervisor. If libvirtd wasn't running, you would receive an error, and the error would probably say, hey, check the libvirtd service, but we know it's running because when we rebooted the server, we checked the server status. So what you can do in Virtual Machine Manager, we can go to Edit, Connection Details, and this shows that there's no load on the CPU, which you would expect. There's literally nothing going on this server, and there's no load as far as memory. There's several gigabytes of memory available. We have a default virtual network, which for the scope of this video, this is all we're going to use. And for storage, notice the location here. It says var libvirt images. This is the default location that the virtual hard drives and such are going to be living for your VMs. You can make this whatever you would like, but again, for this video, we're sticking with the defaults, and I have plenty of storage to be able to do this. So as far as configuring a virtual machine, we have everything we need. But as I mentioned a moment ago, you're going to need an ISO file of an operating system to use as that installation CD for the OS. So let's check on our download. It should have finished. Yep, it's complete. So we're going to go back to our terminal. I'm going to use PWD to see where I'm located. Now I'm located in Home and Eddy. And I know that there's a folder called Downloads in this. If you're not sure, you can you can type ls and you can see downloads. We're going to use the cd command to go into our downloads folder, do ls to list, and we see the ISO. So we're going to use another command to copy this ISO over to our host. This is one of the beauties of Linux, in my opinion. Being able to do this remote management and moving files is baked into the operating system. We don't have to have any extra programs to do this. And also, since we did that key-based authentication earlier, it's going to make this super simple. So the command we're going to use is called scp for secure copy. So we're going to do scp, the name of the file, which in downloads you can start typing the first couple letters and hit tab and it'll complete it for you. So we're copying this file. Let me double click this. I want to get a larger view for you. So we're copying this file to the server, and the account that we're going to connect as is root at the host name. Now we're going to do colon and put the path that we want this file to be copied to. Now you can just copy it to the server, then SSH into the server and move it to its final destination, but we already know, and we got this from looking in the Virtual Machine Manager console, where that storage piece is already going to be looking for ISO files. So we're going to copy it to /var libvirt images. It'll take just a moment or so. The net installer is not very large, and on the local network, it's probably going to be pretty quick. So that's there. Now, we're going to go back to our Virtual Machine Manager. And if you want to confirm that that's there, we should be able to go to Connection Details, go to Storage, and we're going to click the refresh button, and the ISO appears on the list of things that are in that default storage. So now, the moment we've all been waiting for, we're going to make the virtual machine. So within Virtual Machine Manager, we're going to click the button, Create New Virtual Machine. You can do that from the File menu as well. We're going to be using local install media, even though we're not using the install media that's actually on the client that we're working on right now, but remember, this Virtual Machine Manager is connected to the actual server. So the media is local to the KVM server that we're using. So we'll click Forward. Now we're going to click Browse, and there's our ISO file. You could probably hear my neighbors upstairs having a floor stomping contest. Anyway, choose Volume, and it's going to say we can't figure out the operating system you're looking for. Yes, you can. What we're going to do is where it says None Detected, I'm going to highlight that and start typing Fedora. This is a Fedora 30 install. Double click Fedora 30. Click Forward. We're going to keep it at 2 gigs of memory because we're not going to have a GUI on this. We'll give it another virtual CPU, but 1 would be sufficient. For disk space, 20 gigabytes is fine. You don't have to create storage at this time, but for your first couple of VMs to poke around and learn with, I would suggest creating storage. We're going to click Forward. We're going to name our VM, and notice that for storage, it gives you a preview of the effectively the virtual disk file that we're creating, or the image. It's a kcal2 file, so we're going to call this Fedora server test. You can click network selection. We're using all the defaults. We're not going to do any custom configuration. We're just using defaults, and we click finish. It's going to create that, and it's going to start the virtual machine. Now we're able to see that this is the console view. This is the same as if I were to walk over to my lab host server here and stand in front of the monitor I have connected to its VGA port. So this is the same as being in front of that keyboard. Having the viewer installed allows you to be able to see this console. So we're going to hit enter for install Fedora 30. We're going to click through the defaults real quick. It shouldn't take too long because it's just very minimal. Gave it 2 gigs of RAM, gave it 2 vCPUs, so this should happen pretty fast. If it starts to take a while, I'll pause the video again because I don't want to bore you too much with watching text scroll by on your screen. Get to the installer. I'm going to resize this window just a bit. Make that a little bit easier. There we go. So continue. Make sure the NIC's connected by default. Change the host name to test VM. Apply. Click done. We're just going to use the defaults for partitioning. And right now it's setting up the installation source. This is the using the net install, and I've on my video showing in detail how to do this. I like using that because it means all the packages are going to be set. Just to make this go quick, we're doing a minimum install just like we did on the actual host. Begin installation. Let's set up a root password. And we'll set up an account. We'll call it Eddie. I usually make this account an administrator so you have sudo privileges. And in just a couple of minutes, it will be done installing. It'll reboot, and then we will log into it and verify that this is a fully functioning server. and that it has internet access. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll be right back in just a moment with the ending of the installation. And we're back. You can see that we have our console here. Test VM, if you remember, was what we put as the host name for this new VM. So let's log in. All right, and we're in. Let's do IP adder show. And we have an IP address, 192.168.122.199. That's coming from the default virtual network that KVM provides. And this is natted to the NIC that's on your host. So we should, famous last words, right, be able to ping an outside IP address, 8.8.8.8. And we can. That is one of the Google DNS servers. So at this point, we have successfully installed what needs to be installed for KVM on your host server. We have installed Virtual Machine Manager and Virt Viewer, and we now have a functioning VM. So at this point, you know the basics enough to be able to make more VMs and start tinkering around with KVM to learn how things work. I hope you found this video useful for you. If you did and you enjoyed it, make sure you click like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you can be aware of when new content gets posted. I post content, try to post a couple of times a week, usually alternating weeks of music content and IT content. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you the next time.